welcome back to our channel. Today, we dive into the extraordinary life of a figure often hailed as history's most powerful mistress, a woman whose ability to captivate hearts and influence thrones changed the course of nations. Known for her bewitching charm, razor-sharp intellect, and relentless ambition, she rose to unimaginable heights in a world dominated by kings and courtiers. But behind the glittering splendor of royal favors and opulent banquets lies a dark price she paid for that power. From her early days of near obscurity to her transformation into a central figure at court, and from scandalous rumors that tarnished her name to the dramatic fall that ultimately sealed her fate, her journey is as gripping as any historical epic. Join us as we uncover the untold secrets of her life, her relationships, and the legacy she left behind. Introduction and background. Born in January of 1500, Diane entered the world of French aristocracy at a time when the kingdom was pulsing with Renaissance energy and political intrigue. Her father, Jean de Poitiers, was known at court for his razor-sharp intellect and unyielding ambition, qualities he passed directly on to his daughter. Unlike many women of her era, Diane grew up with the kind of education and access that came from moving in elite circles. She was taught not just basic reading and writing but also lessons in courtly behavior, diplomacy, and even some of the masculine pursuits like hunting and horseback riding. Such privileges meant that from a very young age, Diane learned how to navigate the subtle games of influence that swirled around the French throne. Despite her comfortable upbringing, however, life at court was far from simple. This was the reign of King Francis I, a dynamic and often unpredictable ruler who encouraged art, culture, and the refinement of court manners, but who also surrounded himself with political opportunists eager to climb the royal ladder by any means necessary. For a young woman, especially one lauded for her intelligence and beauty, standing out in these high-stakes circles was both thrilling and perilous. While men could flaunt their cunning openly, women of the day had to be far more discreet. Diane, who had inherited her father's calculating mind, recognized early on that survival at court often depended on charm, wit, and an uncanny ability to read the motivations of those around her. This was especially true in an age when alliances were forged or broken at the drop of a silk glove, and where gossip could rise to the level of political currency. Even noble families who seemed secure one day could find themselves in disgrace the next, so it's no surprise that Diane's father, harboring ambitions of his own, meticulously shaped his daughter to become a figure who could hold her own amidst the cutthroat competition. As she grew, Diane's closeness to the throne also meant she was privy to key developments in the kingdom. Francis I's grandiose wars in Italy, his patronage of the arts, and his complicated relationships with other European powers all filtered down to the noble households, affecting who stayed in royal favor and who did not. In addition to this, France was on the cusp of religious shifts that would eventually split the realm. While full-blown conflict had yet to erupt, tensions were already simmering between Catholics and emerging Protestant communities. Diane, perhaps without fully realizing it, was stepping onto a stage where faith, ambition, and personal vendettas collided, where one misstep could mean banishment or worse. Yet Diane's early years remained relatively carefree, thanks to the insulation her noble birth provided. Far from being just a pretty face, she was known to be both witty and poised, attributes that were vital for anyone aiming to thrive at court. This combination of beauty, intelligence, and a certain fearlessness in the face of court drama would set Diane apart. Over time, her ability to charm even the most skeptical of observers made her a compelling figure, eventually drawing the attention of some of the most powerful men in France. Little did anyone suspect just how deeply she would entangle herself in royal affairs, and how high a price she would pay for it all. 2. First marriage. With Louis de BREZI at the tender age of 15, Diane found herself thrust into an arranged marriage that would forever shape her perspective on life at court. Her parents, eager to secure a prestigious alliance, proudly matched her with Louis de BREZI, grandson to King Charles VII, despite the fact he was nearly 4 decades her senior. The wedding took place in 1515, coinciding with the early days of King Francis I's reign, which only added to the lavish pomp surrounding the union. While her family celebrated what they considered a monumental catch, for Diane, life with a husband who was old enough to be her grandfather felt suffocating. In an era when the average lifespan was far shorter than today, marrying a man of that age meant she was not just entering a stifling partnership, she was likely preparing for widowhood at a very young age. And yet, the pressures of noble expectations meant Diane had little choice but to smile through ceremonies and court appearances, trying to maintain the perfect image of a dutiful, obedient wife. This world of rigid propriety contrasted sharply with Diane's vibrant spirit. Rumors soon circulated about her restless energy, her penchant for hunting and horseback riding, and her quiet but intense determination to carve out a life more thrilling than the dreary role of a trophy bride. Some believe it was under these claustrophobic conditions that Diane began honing the shrewdness and flair for manipulation that would later make her notorious at the French court. After all, being married to a man with one foot in the grave, as the whispers went, freed her to develop her own network of allies and confidants, an invaluable skill for navigating the intrigues that lay ahead. In many ways, this first marriage was the crucible in which Diane's resilience was forged, setting the stage for the audacious maneuvers and grand ambitions that would soon make her a legend in royal circles. 3 incidents related to Diane's family. By this stage in her life, Diane's reputation as a high-spirited and captivating figure was well established, and the marriage to Louis seemed only to amplify the intensity with which she lived. Although she was still quite young, she had adapted to court life swiftly, perhaps a bit too swiftly for those used to seeing women simply obey and remain silent. In 1523, just as she was beginning to find her footing as a married noblewoman, her world was unexpectedly thrown into chaos. Louis, renowned for his unwavering loyalty to King Francis I, stumbled upon a conspiracy against the monarch and dutifully informed the crown. What he failed to realize was that one of the chief conspirators was none other than Diane's own father, Jean d'Aitier, the very man who had passed his shrewdness and ambition down to his daughter. The discovery of Jean's role in the plot sent shockwaves through the entire d'Aitier family. Initially, the king ordered Jean's execution, which would have meant the ultimate dishonor for Diane and her relatives. Given Francis I's often mercurial nature, he could be both generous patron and harsh ruler. No one felt safe until a final decision was made. Diane, known even then for her persuasive charm, joined forces with other influential family members to plead for Jean's life. Their combined efforts succeeded, but the victory was bittersweet. The king commuted Jean's death sentence to a lengthy imprisonment. The ordeal left her father physically weakened and permanently tarnished in the eyes of many at court. For Diane, the betrayal by her husband, unintentional or not, was a deep wound. She had already endured a marriage to a man significantly older than herself, and now she bore the humiliation of having to watch her father dragged off to prison because of what Louis had revealed. Historian accounts suggest that this episode not only hardened Diane's resolve but also sharpened the very skills she would later use to navigate the dangerous shoals of royal favor. If she had any lingering illusions about the stability of her new life, they were shattered in this moment. From then on, Diane grew ever more adept at disguising her true emotions, forging alliances quietly, and preparing herself for the next storm that might come her way. And it would come, along with a chance for her to get even in ways no one could have predicted. For first impression with Prince Henry. At the time Diane was flourishing in her early 20s, Prince Henry was just a wide-eyed 7-year-old, yet even at that young age, he was already being drawn into the intense political games of the French court. In 1526, King Francis I found himself compelled to send Henry to Spain as a hostage to secure his own release from the Habsburg Emperor, Charles V. Most accounts suggest that before the boy departed, Diane, serving as a lady-in-waiting to his grandmother, offered him what seemed like a simple ceremonial gesture, a courtly kiss on the cheek. Though public farewells like these were standard procedure for nobility, the impact on Henry was anything but ordinary. Surrounded by the uncertainty of captivity in a foreign land, he clung to the image of this elegant, confident woman who had shown him kindness and attention just as he was being sent away. Historians now view this moment as the seed of Henry's future obsession with Diane, since he spent the next 4 years in Spain daydreaming about her. Even as a child, Henry was overshadowed by his more prominent older brother, and the warmth he associated with Diane's parting gesture seemed to crystallize in his mind, transforming her into a figure of idealized grace and compassion. By the time he finally returned to France, that fleeting goodbye had grown into a romantic fascination, one that would ultimately define much of his reign and forever alter Diane's destiny at the royal court. Henry's return and Diane's calculations. In 1531, Prince Henry made his triumphant return to France after years in Spain, and from the very moment he arrived, everyone at court noticed how tightly he was tethered, both emotionally and symbolically, to Diane. At the coronation of his new stepmother, Queen Eleanor of Austria, the entire royal family appeared in the Queen's colors as a mark of respect. Everyone, that is, except the 12-year-old Henry, who brazenly chose to wear Diane's colors instead. This daring public display not only raised eyebrows but also signaled that he saw Diane as more than just a family friend. For him, she was already the object of an intense fascination. The situation became even more scandalous a few months later, when Henry, still very much a boy, allegedly tried to court the 30-something Diane with the earnestness of a first crush. Right around this time, fate seemed to intervene on Diane's behalf. Her elderly husband passed away, leaving her a widow unshackled from societal restraints. Freed from the marriage she had entered as a teenager, she wasted no time shaping a new identity as an independent noblewoman. Yet Diane was no naive damsel, and she recognized Henry's youthful infatuation for exactly what it was, a powerful card to play in the treacherous game of court politics. Rather than immediately giving in to his advances, she kept the besotted prince at a safe distance, cultivating his desire and, with it, her own influence. More and more, Henry sought her counsel and found in her the warmth he had always yearned for, especially given he still often felt overshadowed by his older brother and the demands of his formidable father, King Francis I. But just as Diane was quietly consolidating her power, orchestrating a future in which she and Henry might rule side by side, an unforeseen obstacle loomed. Unbeknownst to Diane, the royal family had their own plans for Prince Henry, plans that would upend her careful scheming and set the stage for a series of explosive confrontations at the heart of the French court. 6. The marriage between Henry and Catherine de Medici. When young Prince Henry was just 14, the French court decided it was time for him to take a wife, and in 1533, they chose Catherine de Medici, a 14-year-old Italian noblewoman with immense wealth and formidable family ties. Although Catherine bore the illustrious Medici name, many at court looked down on her merchant-class origins, believing her family's fortune was built more on clever banking than on true aristocratic legacy. Initially, Diane might have feared this marriage would end her influence over Henry. After all, Catherine was his age, and she arrived in France with the full endorsement of King Francis I, who hoped the Medici alliance would replenish the royal coffers and strengthen ties with Italy. Yet Diane quickly realized that the new princess, for all her wealth, was vulnerable. Catherine was no great beauty, and she felt out of place in the French court, with many nobles snickering about her foreign manners. Diane, in contrast, had spent years perfecting her charm, her wit, and her impeccable style. Right from the start, she saw how she could mold Catherine into an unwitting ally, someone whose insecurities made her all the easier to control. That control became more overt when rumors started circulating that Diane, at 35, had taken the now 15-year-old Henry as her lover. It was a scandal that turned heads across Europe, but Henry's fascination was obvious. Despite their conspicuous age gap, he was drawn not just to Diane's looks, but to her confidence, her sophistication, and the maternal comfort he'd craved since childhood. Overnight, Diane went from being a mere court beauty to Henry's self-styled mentor, and, in the eyes of many, his true confidant in all matters of the heart and mind. Catherine, meanwhile, faced growing pressure to produce an heir. Months passed, then years, and no pregnancy materialized, casting doubts on whether she could fulfill her most crucial duty as a royal wife. Diane understood that the absence of a child threatened everyone's position. If Henry divorced Catherine, a new bride might arrive with the potential to topple Diane's hard-earned hold on the prince. So Diane embarked on a mission that was equal parts cunning and comical, pushing Catherine toward every conceivable fertility remedy. Some were popular folk cures of the time, herbal tonics and special diets, while others edged into the bizarre, like the suggestion Catherine drink mule urine. Although these methods sound outlandish today, back then they were emblematic of just how desperate everyone had become. For Catherine, the constant barrage of so-called cures must have been both embarrassing and infuriating, yet she was in no position to refuse advice coming from the woman who seemed to hold Henry's heart. Adding to her frustration, Diane played the role of helpful counselor so convincingly that many in court saw her as the guiding hand behind the scenes, shaping Catherine into the queen consort that Henry needed. In truth, the older mistress had an ironclad motive. If Catherine succeeded in bearing a legitimate heir, Diane could maintain her status as Henry's favored companion without the fear of new political alliances threatening her. This was a masterstroke of manipulation, Diane holding on to her power by actively helping her lover's wife become pregnant. It showed the depth of Diane's strategic mind, as well as the extent to which Catherine was outmaneuvered in her own marriage. Beyond the gossip and scandal, this peculiar triangle would lay the groundwork for one of the most complex, tension-filled relationships in French royal history, setting the stage for further clashes, sudden reversals of fortune, and a power dynamic so entangled that it still captivates us centuries later. 7. Diane's peak of power. During Henry's early years on the throne, Diane wielded influence unlike any mistress before her, so much so that she effectively dictated how often the king spent time with his actual wife, Catherine de Medici. Ironically, she urged him to visit Catherine more frequently, purely to secure the crucial heir that would preserve the dynasty, and, by extension, safeguard Diane's own standing. When Catherine at last became pregnant in 1543, culminating in the birth of Prince Francis the following January, it appeared Diane's strategy had paid off. Catherine would go on to bear a remarkable 10 children in total, yet motherhood did not grant her freedom from Diane's shadow. In 1544, as if to underscore his devotion, Henry angrily protested Diane's banishment from court, an order handed down by King Francis I after Diane was accused of treasonous plotting, and even severed ties with his father for a year. 3 years later, upon Francis I's death, Henry was crowned King of France and promptly returned Diane to the pinnacle of power, exiling all who had wronged her. From that moment, she functioned as a shadow queen, silently shaping policy, drafting correspondence with the king's blessing, and elevating her fortunes through lucrative land deals and strategic royal favors. The rivalry between Diane and Queen Catherine, meanwhile, only intensified when the Pope sent Catherine a golden rose, a customary honor, yet included a gleaming pearl necklace specifically for Diane. Emboldened by this public snub of the Queen, Henry lavished his mistress with one audacious gift after another, culminating in the shocking bestowal of France's crown jewels upon Diane rather than his wife. His next present was the opulent Château de Chenonceau, a jewel of the Loire Valley that both women coveted. Diane moved in immediately, transforming the estate into a venue for extravagant soirees that brazenly paraded her status in front of the humiliated queen. By then, Catherine had witnessed enough. She began to strategize behind the scenes, preparing for a time when she might finally cast off Diane's domination. Little did Diane know that the same brazen power plays fueling her triumph would soon set the stage for her eventual downfall. 8. The tournament tragedy and the death of Henry II. By the summer of 1559, Diane was nearing her 60s yet still held a magnetic charm over King Henry II, who flaunted his devotion by wearing her signature black and white colors during the grand jousting festivities in Paris. Ostensibly, these tournaments were meant to celebrate recent peace treaties and royal marriages, but everyone knew Henry's foremost goal was to display his prowess and validate the honor of the woman he adored. Catherine de Medici, seething quietly in the background, had grown accustomed to such brazen acts of favoritism, and perhaps even sensed the looming tragedy. Rumors had long swirled that Diane, determined to preserve her youthful glow, might have consumed hazardous elixirs, like liquid gold, reflecting the lengths she would go to maintain control over a king almost 20 years her junior. Standing on the sidelines, she watched Henry charge into the lists, fully confident he would yet again triumph over his rivals. When the relatively unknown Count of Montgomery shattered the king's complacency by nearly unseating him, Henry's pride demanded a rematch, ignoring any concerns that the day's festivities had already seen enough close calls. In a twist of cruel fate, the next pass proved catastrophic. Montgomery's lance splintered on impact, sending shards of wood piercing through Henry's eye and into his brain. The scene was so gruesome that even the usually composed Diane and her bitter adversary Catherine collapsed at the sight, while Prince Francis looked on in terror. In the tense days that followed, the royal doctors struggled to remove the splinters, resorting to agonizing procedures that offered only false hope. Henry drifted between bouts of delirium and fleeting lucidity, his once commanding presence reduced to helpless suffering. For Diane, who had been at his side through years of court intrigue, forging a power base once unimaginable for a mistress, this was a cruel and public undoing of everything she had carefully built. As whispers circulated that perhaps divine vengeance had finally struck, the Queen quietly took control of Henry's bedside, effectively shutting Diane out of any final goodbyes. Within days, it became tragically clear that the king's injuries were fatal, spelling the end not only of Henry's life but also of the lofty status Diane had enjoyed as the undisputed Shadow Queen of France. 9. Catherine's revenge and Diane's last years. In the aftermath of King Henry's brutal injury, Diane found herself suddenly powerless and unwelcome in the very palace where she once reigned as the Shadow Queen. Catherine de Medici, who had always seethed at Diane's influence, finally seized the moment to reassert her rightful place. While Henry lay bedridden, Diane stayed away, partly out of respect for protocol. She feared Catherine would publicly dismiss her, but also because Catherine had effectively barred her. Diane may have cherished a faint hope that Henry, having initially clung to life, would recover and reinstate her at court. After all, during those first agonizing weeks, Henry showed sporadic signs of improvement, listening to music, dictating letters, and even recognizing those around him. Yet by July, his condition took a tragic turn. He lost his sight, then his sanity, and eventually his life on July 10, 1559. Diane's entire world shattered with his final breath. The new power structure left no room for Diane. Catherine, now queen mother to Henry's legitimate heir, Francis II, moved quickly to exact her revenge. She wasted no time forcing Diane to return the coveted crown jewels, which Henry had once scandalously gifted to his mistress instead of his wife. Next, Catherine reclaimed the exquisite Château de Chenonceau, an estate that had become Diane's personal symbol of triumph. Compounding these humiliations, Catherine refused to allow Diane any role in Henry's funeral rites. Some accounts even suggest that Henry, in his final delirium, called out for Diane, a request Catherine coldly ignored. The Queen Mother had learned well from her rival. She understood the potency of a carefully cultivated image, and she chose the broken lance, symbol of Henry's fatal accident, as her own personal emblem. It was a subtle yet piercing reminder of Diane's downfall and Catherine's ascension. Banished from the heart of political life, Diane retreated to her Château d'Ianet, where she spent her remaining years in far more subdued circumstances. While she still possessed significant wealth and land, her once unassailable position at court was finished. Yet traces of Diane's extraordinary life lingered long after her influence waned. Even as Catherine consolidated power, eventually guiding not just Francis II but also her next two sons who would ascend the throne, rumors and legends about Diane's beauty, cunning, and supposed elixirs persisted. She had once been powerful enough to command the king's attention above all else, but now she was isolated, bearing the brunt of a queen mother's icy vengeance. Over time, history would paint Diane as one of the most formidable royal mistresses of Europe's Renaissance era, forever bound to the tragic tale of a king's miscalculated joust and the merciless retaliation of a woman scorned. Diane's tragic end and legacy. Long after her exile from the royal court, Diane de's final chapter proved every bit as dramatic, and ultimately tragic, as her meteoric rise. Stripped of the influence that once revolved around King Henry II's every whim, she retreated to her beloved Château d'Ianet. There, she watched from a distance as Catherine de Medici consolidated her power and began to steer France through turbulent times. Although rumors persisted that Diane might engineer a comeback, leveraging the loyalty of certain nobles who still admired her intelligence and poise, fate intervened in a cruelly ironic way. Ever the athlete, Diane refused to act her age, insisting on vigorous horseback rides well into her 60s. In 1565, at 64, she was thrown from her mount, suffering severe injuries from which she never fully recovered. She clung to life for another year, passing away in 1566, precisely when Catherine was at the zenith of her own authority as Queen Mother. Yet even death offered Diane no respite from scandal. During the French Revolution, revolutionaries, in a wave of anti-aristocratic fervor, opened her tomb and desecrated her remains, consigning them to a mass grave along with the remains of other nobles from a bygone era. This brutal act might have ended Diane's story for good, were it not for a startling discovery made centuries later. When modern historians examined her unearthed hair in 2009, they uncovered traces of gold, evidence suggesting that the notorious rumor of her drinking liquid gold in pursuit of perpetual youth had been more than mere gossip. Although many had once assumed her fatal accident on horseback was the primary cause of death, this revelation hinted that prolonged exposure to gold could have gravely undermined her health. Such news breathed fresh intrigue into a legend already brimming with ambition, seduction, and spectacle. Famously vain, Diane indulged in self-celebration, commissioning sculptures depicting herself as a Roman goddess, posing for nude portraits, among them, possibly François Clouet's, a lady in her bath, and surrounding herself with an aura of timeless beauty that mystified the court. Even in death, her name conjures an image of a woman who refused to yield, carving out an extraordinary path amid the treacherous politics of 16th-century France, only to have it all burn away in the flames of retribution, revolution, and an alchemic quest for everlasting youth. And that concludes our look into the life of history's most powerful mistress, a woman whose triumphs and tribulations remind us that great influence often comes at an enormous cost. Her story stands as a testament to the fleeting nature of power and the profound risks of living in a perpetual spotlight. If you found her rise and fall as fascinating as we did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of figures who shaped history. Let us know in the comments what you think about her story, and as always, thank you for watching.